You came up in a private conversation, and for a moment the air went still. Everyone had something to say, but no one dared to say too much. They mentioned your name softly, like it still carried power, like it still hurt to say it out loud. You came up tonight, unexpectedly, and I realized no one really got over you. They just learned to live around your absence. Your name floated into the room, and suddenly all the laughter faded. That's the effect you still have, even when you're not there. Someone asked if I still think about you, and I couldn't answer. Silence became my confession. They said you've changed, but I smiled quietly because they don't know you the way I do. You've always been changing. You came up in the kind of talk where truth hides behind smiles, and I caught myself defending you without meaning to. They said you look happier now, and I wondered if that's true or just something they tell themselves to feel better about leaving. When they spoke your name, I felt my chest tighten. It's crazy how time passes, but your memory never does. You came up in a whisper, and yet it echoed louder than anything else that night. They were curious about how you're doing, but all I could think about was how I'm still not doing fine without you. Someone said you looked different, lighter, healed, and I smiled, pretending that didn't sting. They said your eyes don't hold the same sadness anymore, and for some reason, that hurt more than I expected. When they mentioned you, I realized how carefully I've built my bus around your silence. You came up, and they laughed about old times, but I sat quietly, remembering everything that laughter cost me. They said you're finally doing better, and part of me was proud, while another part wished you weren't. Your name was the only one that made everyone go quiet, like they all remembered something sacred and broken. They said you've moved on, but I still see you in every version of love I tried to rebuild. You came up in a random story, and I tried to act like your name didn't set my heartbeat on fire again. Someone asked what happened between us. I said nothing, but my eyes told every secret my lips couldn't. They said you were smiling again, and I felt both relief and regret fighting in my chest. You came up unexpectedly, and I realized I still defend you in every conversation, even when I shouldn't. They said you're in love now, and I couldn't tell if that was supposed to make me happy or destroy me. Every time they say your name, it feels like reopening a letter I swore I'd burned. They said you still talk about me sometimes, and I don't know if that's closure or torture. Your name was mentioned like an accident, but the silence afterward felt intentional. They said you looked peaceful. I just wish I could say the same for myself. You came up, and they said you've changed for the better, but I still remember the version of you that held me like forever. Someone mentioned your favorite song, and the whole room shifted, like even the melody remembered your ghost. They said you've grown colder, and I couldn't help but think, maybe I taught you how. You came up, and they said you've been avoiding the places we used to go. I guess I'm not the only one haunted. They said you finally found peace, and I wondered if it came from forgetting me. Someone mentioned your smile, and for a split second, I could see it again, clear as the day you left. They said you were happier now, but no one noticed how forced their voices sounded saying it. You came up in conversation, and suddenly I was 10 months back, feeling everything I swore I buried. They said you've moved on completely, but something in their tone told me you haven't. When they said your name, I felt like time folded, like we were right back where it all went wrong. They said you're doing fine without me, and that's when I realized maybe you always could. You came up, and I found myself smiling at memories that still hurt to remember. They said you've started to open up again, and I silently thanked the universe for healing you, even if it wasn't through me. They said you're no longer bitter, that you've forgiven the past. I hope that includes me. You came up, and I could tell they were careful with their words, as if mentioning you might break me again. Someone asked if I'd take you back if you called, and I laughed just to hide how much I still would. They said you seem distant now, like you're guarding your heart, maybe because I once broke it. You came up unexpectedly, and my heart reacted before my face could hide it. They said you found someone new, and for a moment I forgot how to breathe. You came up, and they spoke kindly of you. I realized I still only speak softly when it's about you. They said you were seen smiling at someone else, and I pretended it didn't matter, even though it shattered me quietly. They said your energy feels different now, lighter, calmer, as if you finally stopped carrying all that pain around. You came up, and they wondered if you ever look back. I stayed quiet because I already know you do. Someone said you've grown distant, and I couldn't tell them that distance has always been your way of protecting yourself. They said your smile feels genuine again, and I hope that's true, even if I'm no longer the reason behind it. You came up in conversation, and for a moment, it felt like the whole room remembered the version of love we once were. They said you've changed your number, your habits, your friends, but no one mentioned how you changed your heart. Someone brought up your name, and I laughed too quickly, hoping they wouldn't notice how much it still hurts. They said you've become quieter, more private. Maybe that's what heartbreak does. It teaches us to guard what's left. You came up in the kind of talk that feels too honest, the kind where everyone pretends they're over something they're not. They said you're finally free, but freedom doesn't always mean peace, and I wonder which one you've found. You came up, and suddenly everyone's eyes were on me, waiting to see if I'd flinch at your name. They said you've forgiven yourself for the past. I wish I could say the same for me. Someone asked if I ever reach out, and I said no. But the truth is, I reach for you in silence every day. They said you looked stunning lately, and I smiled, remembering how beauty always followed your chaos. You came up, and they said you've grown softer. I knew you would. Pain tends to carve gentleness into the right souls. They said you're no longer bitter, and I'm glad because I prayed for your healing even when I stopped praying for us. You came up during a conversation about love, and I realized you were my definition of it. They said you've started writing again. I wonder if your words still bleed the way mine do. Someone said you've been smiling at your phone lately, and I had to look away before jealousy gave me away. They said you've been doing fine, and I wanted to ask, since when does surviving count as fine? You came up in a story, and I felt the same ache that never really left since the day you did. They said you're learning to trust again, and for some reason, that broke me more than anything. Someone mentioned your voice, and I remembered how it used to sound when it said my name like a secret. They said you've been glowing lately, and I couldn't help but wonder whose love is lighting you up now. You came up in passing, but I couldn't pass by that moment. Your memory grabbed me like a ghost that refuses to fade. They said you're calmer now, more peaceful. I hope it's because you healed, not because you gave up. You came up, and they said you've stopped looking back. I wish I could say the same. Someone mentioned how happy you seem lately, and I felt both proud and painfully replaced. They said you've been smiling more. Maybe that's the kind of revenge I always wanted for you, Joy. You came up, and someone said they were good for you, but I think you were always too much for anyone ordinary. They said you've changed your look. I guess new beginnings always start with a mirror. You came up, and for the first time, I didn't break. Maybe that's what healing feels like, quiet acceptance. They said you're finally okay, and I smiled, knowing that's all I ever wanted, even if it cost me peace. Someone asked what you were like, and I realized I still describe you like a memory I can't let die. They said you've been avoiding old places. Maybe we both still flinch at ghosts we created. You came up in a talk about soulmates, and no one knew I was sitting there, living proof of what almost was. They said you've stopped talking about the past. I guess you learned to live with what can't be undone. You came up and they said you were glowing. I wish I could tell them you used to glow for me. They said you're learning to love again, and I prayed that this time it feels like peace, not survival. You came up, and I caught myself defending your absence, as if protecting you could still protect me. They said you're traveling more now. Maybe that's how you escape the memories that used to anchor you. You came up, and someone said, "You're better off apart." I didn't argue, but my heart still disagreed. They said you've become stronger. I smiled, because pain was always your cruelest teacher. Someone mentioned how different you seem. I guess love changes us, even when it ends. They said you've been quiet lately, and I wondered if silence feels softer for you now. You came up, and someone asked if I'd take it all back. I said no, but my soul whispered yes. They said you've been kind lately, gentler with everyone. I wish I could have met this healed version of you.